The sun is barely up over the Luangwa Valley, and the river is already breathing. A slow, brown exhale of heat and moisture rising off the surface in thin ribbons that curl and vanish before they reach the treetops. The hippos have already retreated into the deeper channels, their eyes and nostrils like dark stones, just visible above the waterline. Along the banks, the mud is cracked in places, baked hard from the long dry months, but at the water's edge, it is soft and dark and alive, with the pressed prints of everything that came to drink in the night. Elephant, zebra, warthog, and something else, something heavier, something that moved in a wide, deliberate arc, not straight to the water and back again like the others, but circling, calculating. The prints are fresh enough that the edges have not yet begun to dry. Whatever made them was here not long ago, and it may not have gone far. If you have ever watched a wild place hold its breath, this is what it looks like. Before this story reaches its end, you will not want to look away from it. Stay with it. Subscribe now so you never miss another moment like this one, because what is about to happen in this valley is the kind of thing that most people spend entire lifetimes hoping to witness, and almost never do. The buffalo is a bull, fully grown, somewhere in the region of 700 kilograms of bone and muscle and horn. He is not a young animal. The bosses of his horns have been battered smooth over years of use, the thick helmeted mass of fused keratin that sits across his forehead, darkened with age. His hide bears old scars, long healed channels through the tough gray-black skin that speak of previous encounters he survived. He moves through the bush with the particular kind of deliberate slowness that large animals adopt when they are not alarmed, a low, forward-leaning gait that covers ground efficiently without wasting energy. His nose works constantly, reading the air in long, slow drafts, and his ears swivel and adjust with the small sounds of the morning. He has been separated from the main herd for 2 days now. This happens sometimes. A bull reaches a certain age, a certain rank within the shifting social structure of the herd, and he begins to spend time at the margins, drifting away from the main body for hours or even days before drifting back. Some bulls form small bachelor groups, 2 or 3 animals moving together for companionship and mutual protection. This bull has done none of that. He is alone, and in the Luangwa Valley, alone is a dangerous way to be. The valley sits in the eastern arm of the Great Rift, one of the oldest geological features on the African continent, a place where the Earth's crust has been slowly pulling apart for millions of years. The Luangwa River is the valley's spine, carving through alluvial floodplains and dense thickets of ebony and sausage trees and wild fig, depositing rich sediment on its banks that draws wildlife in extraordinary concentrations. In the dry season, when the surrounding bush has bleached and cracked, and the waterholes inland have reduced to mud wallows and then to nothing, the river becomes the only reliable source of water across a vast area. Everything that lives in this valley must come to it eventually, and everything that hunts in this valley knows that. The lions arrived 3 days ago. They came from the south, 4 females and a large male, moving through the night, in that loose, unhurried formation that prides adopt when they are traveling rather than hunting. They are from a pride that holds a large territory along the eastern bank of the river, a territory established over years and defended with consistency and occasional violence. They know this stretch of the valley intimately. They know where the game trails run down to the water. They know which sections of bank offer cover for a waiting predator, and which sections are open and exposed. They know where the buffalo cross. The male settled first, finding a patch of shade beneath a stand of acacia trees 100 meters back from the river, and he is still there now as the morning warms. 2 of the females are with him, draped across each other in the heavy, liquid way that lions rest, their breathing slow and visible. But the other 2 females are not resting. They moved out before first light, fanning away from the main group in opposite directions, moving parallel to the river, reading it in the way that experienced hunters read a landscape, looking not for what is there now, but for what is about to arrive. The buffalo does not know the lions are here. He knows something. His body chemistry is already responding to signals too subtle for any human observer to detect, a faint wrongness in the air that his nervous system has translated into low-level alertness without yet producing any specific fear response. His pace has not changed. He is still moving toward the river, drawn by thirst after 2 days of moving through dry country. His need for water beginning to override the quieter warnings his senses are sending him. This is the oldest conflict in the biology of large herbivores: the drive toward water against the awareness that water is also where predators wait. At a certain level of dehydration, thirst wins. Every time. The Luangwa, at this point in the dry season, is perhaps 30 meters wide, running slow and deep through a channel that is cut down into the dark alluvial soil. The banks on both sides drop away sharply in places, vertical cuts of earth 2 or 3 meters high, where the floods of the wet season have undercut the bank and left it hanging. In other places, the bank shelves more gently, and it is at these points that animals cross, their hooves finding purchase on the graduated slope of compressed mud and gravel. The buffalo knows these crossing points. He has used them before, in other seasons, moving with the herd through the familiar rhythms of the valley's year. He is angling toward one such crossing now, moving through a belt of Jesse bush, the dense, tangled thicket of Combretum and magic guari that crowds the margins of the floodplain. The vegetation is thick enough to reduce visibility to a few meters in any direction, and he moves through it carefully, pushing aside branches with the massive bulk of his shoulder, his hooves finding the game trail through the middle of the tangle almost by habit. The first lion is 50 meters ahead of him, and off to the left, stationary, half crouched behind a fallen acacia trunk. She has been in position for 20 minutes. She is not there by accident. What lions do, the thing that separates them from most other large predators on the African savanna, is not simply their size or their strength, or even their intelligence. It is their capacity to cooperate. Individual lions are not especially fast. A zebra at full sprint will outpace a lion without much difficulty over any distance greater than a few hundred meters. What lions have instead is the ability to position themselves relative to each other and relative to the terrain in ways that close off options for the animals they hunt. They do not simply chase prey, they configure the landscape. The second female has worked her way around to the riverbank itself, settling into a low depression just above the crossing point, screened by a curtain of reed and papyrus grass. She is downwind of the approaching buffalo. She is patient. She has done this many times. And between the two females, moving along the game trail, directly toward the waiting predator ahead of him, is the buffalo. He is perhaps 30 meters from the first lion now, and he still does not know she is there. The Jesse bush swallows sound and scent and movement, and he is pushing through it, with his head slightly lowered against the resistance of the branches. Then the wind shifts. It is a small shift, the kind of slight, momentary rotation of the morning air that happens routinely in the bush as the land heats unevenly. It lasts perhaps 3 seconds, but 3 seconds is enough. The buffalo's nose catches something that does not belong to the vegetation around him, a complex, fatty, deeply alarming signature that his nervous system translates instantly and completely into one single, overwhelming response. Lion. He stops. Every muscle in his body locks simultaneously, 700 kilograms of animal, suddenly, utterly motionless. His head comes up, horns swinging back, as he raises his nose to read the air again. The ears go wide and rigid, rotating forward. His eyes, dark and deep, scan the vegetation ahead with an intensity that is almost visible, a quality of attention so concentrated it seems to change the texture of the light around him. For 3 full seconds, nothing moves. Then the first lion stands up. She does not rush. She rises from behind the fallen trunk with a kind of controlled deliberateness, her amber eyes fixed on the buffalo, her posture shifting into the low, forward-weighted stance of an animal that is ready but not yet committed. She is 30 meters away from him. In open ground, that is a distance she could cover in 2 seconds. In the Jesse bush, with its tangle of fallen branches and interlocking stems, it will take longer. The buffalo turns and runs. He does not run blindly. Even in the explosive first seconds of flight, there is a kind of intelligence to his movement, a selection of the path of least resistance through the thicket, his hooves hammering down on the baked earth with a sound like a continuous low detonation. He is fast, Genuinely, surprisingly fast for an animal of his size, his legs driving him forward in huge ground-covering strides, his heavy head swinging with the rhythm of his movement. Behind him, the first lion is coming, bursting through the Jessie bush, with a different kind of speed, leaner and more fluid, her body stretching and compressing in the long, elastic gallop that covers distance faster than it looks possible. But the buffalo is not running back into the bush. He cannot. The first lion came from that direction. He cannot run parallel to the river, because the Jessie thicket walls him on one side and the bank is too steep in the sections between the crossing points. His options have been reduced to one. He is running toward the river, toward the crossing point, where the bank shelves gently down to the water, toward the second lion. She hears him before she sees him, the hammering of his hooves transmitting through the ground and through the air, the sound of something very large, moving very fast. She rises from the depression, stepping out of the papyrus screen into the open ground above the crossing point. And now there are two lions between the buffalo and every direction that is not the river itself. He sees the second lion at the same moment she steps into view, perhaps 20 meters ahead of him, directly between him and the crossing. He does not stop. He swerves, a hard, powerful change of direction that would be remarkable in an animal half his size, cutting left along the bank top, paralleling the river, looking for another way down. The lions follow, not at a flat sprint now, but in a controlled, loping run that keeps pace with him without committing fully. They are working him, keeping him moving, keeping him on the river side of the thicket so he cannot turn back into the bush. This is the configuration they needed. This is what the morning's patient positioning was for. The bank here is sheer, a vertical cut of dark earth, dropping 3 meters straight down to the water. The buffalo cannot descend here. He runs on, his breathing loud now, a deep rhythmic bellowing that carries across the water and sends a family of pied kingfishers scattering from their perches downstream. On the far bank, 2 impala that came to drink stop and lift their heads and stand for a moment in perfect stillness before turning and walking quickly back into the trees. 40 meters ahead, the bank drops and becomes more gradual again. Another possible crossing point, narrower than the first, more turbulent water funneling between exposed rocks, but descendable. The buffalo is heading for it, the lions tracking him from behind and to his right, close enough to apply pressure, far enough back to conserve their energy for the moment that will matter. But the Luangwa is not empty. The river at this season carries its own dangers, and they are not small ones. The dry months have concentrated the hippopotamus population into fewer and deeper sections of the channel, and the crocodiles have followed the hippos and the fish downstream into the same compressed sections of river. This stretch of bank is one of those sections where the water narrows between the rocks. There are 7 large Nile crocodiles, some of them well over 4 meters long, distributed along the river in that particular stillness they maintain, half submerged, invisible, to anything that does not know exactly what it is looking for. The buffalo does not know. He cannot. He is operating now entirely within the biology of prey in extremis, his world reduced to the immediacy of the threat behind him, to the narrowing of options, to the next possible escape. The drop is steeper than it looked at speed, and he hits the sloped bank hard, his front legs absorbing the shock in a way that leaves deep gouge marks in the soft mud as he slides the last meter into the water. The cold hit of the river does not slow him. He plunges in and begins to move, his head high above the surface, his powerful legs churning the dark water, the current catching him and pushing him slightly downstream as he swims hard for the far bank. The lions stop at the water's edge. This is a boundary they do not cross, not because they cannot swim. Lions are capable swimmers and will cross rivers when they need to. But this river, this section, at this time of year, carries risks that even the calm calculation of an experienced predator declines to accept. The male lion has appeared at the bank top now, drawn by the noise and movement. He stands with the 2 females, and they watch the buffalo cross, their tails moving in slow, expressive arcs, their eyes tracking every movement with undiminished intensity. The buffalo is halfway across. The current is stronger than it appeared from the bank, and he is being pushed downstream, his angle of crossing shifting despite his effort. He is working hard, harder than he expected, his legs driving in powerful cycling strokes beneath the surface, his nostrils flaring wide to keep his nose above water. The crocodile has been watching since before the buffalo entered the water. It registered the disturbance of the entry, the frequency and pattern of the vibrations, and it has been moving since, a submerged glide so smooth it leaves almost no surface disturbance, just a slight compression of water ahead of it, visible as a faint line if you know exactly where to look. It is 4 meters long and weighs perhaps 300 kilograms, and it has taken wildebeest, zebra, impala, and waterbuck in this section of river across many seasons. It is a supremely effective ambush predator in water. It is closing the angle on the buffalo from downstream, using the current to carry it, without effort. The buffalo is perhaps 8 meters from the far bank when the crocodile strikes. It comes from beneath, the huge jaws closing on the buffalo's left rear leg, just above the hock. The force of the bite enormous, generated by jaw muscles of extraordinary power. A large Nile crocodile can generate a bite force of over 2,000 kilograms per square centimeter. The buffalo feels it as a shock that travels through his entire body, a force that pulls him sideways and down with sudden terrible certainty. He bellows, a deep, resonant call that echoes off the far bank and sends the impala that had stopped to watch bolting back into the trees on the far side. He surges forward with everything he has, his body twisting against the grip, his front legs churning for purchase on the river bottom, which is close now, close enough that his hooves find occasional contact with the mud and gravel below. The crocodile holds on and begins to pull back, trying to draw him downstream, trying to turn the encounter in its favor. This is the death roll that crocodiles use to disorient and drown prey, a powerful axial rotation of the body that uses the animal's own mass and the resistance of the water against it. But the buffalo is not a small animal. 700 kilograms of determined muscle is not easy to rotate, even for a 4-meter crocodile, and the buffalo's feet are now finding the bottom with increasing frequency as the river shallows toward the far bank. He drives forward with every ounce of strength he has, his whole body straining against the hold on his leg, the water around him churning white and brown with the struggle. On the near bank, the lions are watching with an attention so complete it looks like concentration. The male has settled into a crouch, his eyes never leaving the opposite bank. The buffalo gains a meter, 2 meters. His front feet are on the bank now, his legs driving into the mud, his body half out of the water, the crocodile still holding on, but losing the advantage of buoyancy, its own body now having to work against gravity rather than with the water. The bite holds. The buffalo does not stop. He pulls himself out of the river in a sustained, agonizing effort, the crocodile dragging behind him, holding on as its body emerges from the water onto the lower mud shelf of the far bank. Here the crocodile is in an entirely different context. On land it is powerful, but fundamentally out of its element, and the buffalo does not pause to register this. He simply keeps moving, keeps driving forward, his rear leg pulling the crocodile holding, both animals locked in a contest of grip and strength and will. And then the crocodile lets go. It does so abruptly, releasing the leg and sliding backward off the bank into the water in a single smooth movement, the surface closing over it without drama. The buffalo surges forward, up the bank, and onto the floodplain of the far side, his movement ragged now, his left rear leg showing the damage of the bite, a deep wound with the particular character of crocodile dentition, puncture and compression, rather than cut, but serious, and bleeding freely. He does not stop. He cannot stop, not yet. He moves up the far bank and into the tree line, and for a long moment, the scene at the river is completely still, just the water moving, just the surface of the Lukangwa, continuing its slow, indifferent progression downstream, as if nothing of any significance had occurred. On the near bank, the lions have not moved. It would be easy to imagine that they feel something recognizable as frustration, watching their quarry cross to the far bank. But the biology of a predator is not built around disappointment. It is built around the next opportunity, and the next one after that, and the conservation of energy between them. The two females are already turning away from the bank, moving back toward the shade of the acacia trees where the other two lions are waiting. They will rest through the heat of the day and move again in the evening, when the temperature drops and the game trails down to the water fill again. The male stays at the bank a moment longer, looking at the far bank with those amber eyes. Then he turns and follows the females. The buffalo stands in the tree line on the far bank, breathing. His sides heave with each breath, the massive barrel of his chest expanding and contracting with the effort of what he has just done. His left rear leg is trembling, not from weakness, but from the same adrenaline that is still working through his entire system, the physiological echo of extreme danger. The wound is bleeding, but not catastrophically. He will carry the marks of this morning for the rest of his life, however long that turns out to be. He stands and breathes for a long time. The wound from the crocodile will not kill him quickly if it does not become infected, and buffalo have an immune system of considerable robustness shaped by millions of years of existence alongside exactly these kinds of injuries. Whether it will eventually be the wound that limits him, that slows him enough to make him vulnerable to the next encounter, is a question only time and the valley will answer. But right now, in this moment, he is alive. He has moved through a configuration of threats that was designed, whether by the intelligence of the lions or the ancient instinct of the crocodile, or simply by the geography of the valley itself, to produce one outcome. He has moved through it and come out the other side. This is not luck in any simple sense. It is the product of an animal's entire evolved history, every generation of buffalo that survived long enough to reproduce, every body structure and behavioral response and physiological capacity that was passed forward through time to arrive precisely here, in these few minutes, on this particular morning, on this particular river. The Luangwa Valley does not distinguish between the remarkable and the routine. What happened this morning has happened before, in some form, and will happen again. The river takes no notice. The lions rest. The crocodile submerges and becomes invisible once more. But for the buffalo standing in the shade of the far tree line, breathing slowly back to something approaching calm, the morning has been everything. Let us go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of this morning, but further back, to the context that made this moment possible, to the shape of this valley and the forces that produced the extraordinary concentration of life within it. The Luangwa River rises in the highlands of Zambia, fed by the seasonal rains that come to Central Africa between November and April. During the wet season, it swells enormously, filling its wide valley with sheets of shallow brown water that extend far beyond the permanent channel, flooding the flat alluvial plains and sending life scattering to higher ground. Then the rains end and the slow recession begins, the water pulling back month by month toward the permanent channel, leaving behind a floodplain of extraordinary fertility, the sediment deposited by each inundation adding to a soil of remarkable richness. It is this richness that drives everything else. The grasses that grow on the floodplain after the floods recede are dense and nutritious, and they draw grazers in the thousands. Buffalo, in particular, respond to this abundance, forming herds that can number several hundred individuals, tight, defensive aggregations of animals that move across the plain in the rhythm of the season, following the flush of new growth as it advances and retreats with the water. A large buffalo herd is a formidable thing, a collective organism of considerable defensive capability. Lions prey on buffalo, but they do so with real care. An injured lion in wild Africa is frequently a dead lion, and buffalo are capable of inflicting serious injury. The big herds provide protection through numbers and through collective vigilance. Many pairs of eyes, many noses, a collective nervous system spread across hundreds of animals that can detect a threat and respond to it long before any individual animal would have noticed anything. It is when buffalo leave the herd, or are separated from it, that the calculation changes entirely. The bull we have been following has been a member of a herd of perhaps 300 animals, a herd that ranges across a large section of the valley floor, moving with the remaining green grass as the dry season advances. 2 days ago, the herd was crossing a section of broken ground, an area of old termite mounds and shallow drainage channels that interrupted the flat plain and created difficulties for a moving aggregation of large animals. In the confusion of the crossing, in the jostling and redirection that happens when a large herd negotiates difficult terrain, he drifted to the edge of the group and then, gradually, away from it. He did not panic. Old bulls do this sometimes, falling back from the pace of the herd without the urgency that younger animals feel about maintaining contact. The herd moved on. He followed at a slower pace, and then, as the morning heated and the distance between him and the main body increased, he stopped following and simply stood for a while in the shade of a large fig tree, his tail switching slowly at the flies that gathered around him. By afternoon, the herd was out of sight, and he was alone. He spent the first night on a patch of high ground, not far from a small seasonal waterhole that still held some muddy water at its center. He drank sparingly, his feet sinking into the gray mud of the margin, and then he moved to the highest point of the rise and stood in the darkness with the sounds of the valley around him, hyenas calling, far to the south, a distant elephant feeding in the Jesse thicket, closer, the sound of a nightjar. He stood and listened and read the air through the night in a state of low-level alertness that never quite became sleep. He moved the next day, grazing on the dry grass of the plain, moving slowly and steadily, and it was during this movement that the lions, traveling their own route south through the valley, crossed his trail. Not his current position, but where he had been an hour before, and this information, available in the compressed organic molecules of his scent, pressed into the dust and grass stems of the plain, was sufficient to redirect the lions. They are experienced hunters. The pride has existed in this territory for many years, its composition shifting with births and deaths, and the movement of young males away from the group, but its core of adult females forming a consistent, knowledgeable hunting unit. They have hunted buffalo before, many times, and they understand the risk. They understand that the right configuration of terrain and approach can reduce the risk substantially. They moved on his trail with the patient, unhurried persistence of predators that are not yet hungry enough to take risks, but are always ready to take an opportunity when one presents itself. By nightfall of the first day, they had closed some of the distance. By the second morning, they had his general location, and by the time the sun had fully cleared the hills to the east, the two lead females were in position. The rest of the story you know. But there is more to say about the river itself, and about what the river means in this context. Because the Luangwa is not merely a backdrop to this morning, it is a participant. Large rivers in Africa are the most complex ecological systems on the continent. They are the axis around which everything turns. In the dry season, the single, irreplaceable resource that concentrates life into configurations of density and interaction that simply do not occur anywhere else in the landscape. Along the Luangwa, this concentration reaches a level that early travelers found almost impossible to believe. The explorer naturalists who came to this valley in the 19th century wrote accounts that their readers in Europe dismissed as exaggeration, descriptions of riverbanks so densely occupied by hippos that you could walk across their backs without touching water, of elephants in herds so large they blackened the plains, of predator and prey in such close proximity that the drama of survival seemed to play out continuously from dawn to dark and back to dawn again. The valley has changed since those accounts were written, as every wild place has changed, but it retains enough of its original character to still be one of the most concentrated expressions of African wildlife remaining on Earth, and the river remains at the center of that concentration. The Nile crocodile is among the oldest of the valley's permanent residents, not in the individual sense, but in the evolutionary sense. Crocodilians have been present on this continent in recognizably modern form for well over 80 million years. They were here before the ancestors of the buffalo, before the ancestors of the lion, before the earliest recognizable members of the human lineage walked upright on the same African plains. They have watched, from the surfaces of African rivers, epochs come and go. They are specialists of the water-land interface, and they are supremely effective at what they do. A large Nile crocodile hunts with an investment of energy so economical it borders on efficiency-made art form. It positions itself at a crossing point, using information gathered across years of experience, waits in a state of metabolic near-suspension that minimizes caloric expenditure, and then, when the moment arrives, expends energy in a single explosive commitment. The strike is among the fastest of any large predator on Earth, a movement so rapid that in normal observation, it appears as an instantaneous transition from stillness to contact. What makes it work is not just the speed, but the precision of the positioning that precedes it, the long, patient geometry of approach that puts the crocodile exactly where it needs to be before the target arrives. Against a large, healthy adult buffalo, even this precision was not sufficient today. The crocodile will not be hungry for some time. Its metabolic rate is low enough that a single large meal can sustain it for weeks, and it expended relatively little energy in the attempt this morning. It will resume its position in the river, and it will wait, and eventually something will come to the crossing that is smaller, or slower, or less fortunate than the buffalo was this morning. The river guarantees it. Further upstream, in the section of the Luangwa, where the channel widens and the current slows over a broad gravel bed, there are other dramas unfolding in this same morning. A female elephant has led her family group of 11 down to the water, the 3 youngest calves pressing close to the legs of their mothers and older sisters as the family moves into the shallows. The smallest calf, perhaps 3 weeks old, and still working out the coordination of its trunk with the imperfect concentration of the very young, attempts to drink directly by submerging the end of its face in the water and inhaling, a technique that is not yet working the way it is supposed to. Its mother stands close, touching it intermittently with the tip of her own trunk in a gesture of reassurance. The water is important, but it is also dangerous for the young ones. A large crocodile took a 2-month-old calf from a family group at this exact spot 3 seasons ago, the strike coming without warning as the family was crossing, the calf there and then not there, the water closing over both of them in a second. The family stood at the bank for 20 minutes afterward, the matriarch vocalizing in low, resonant calls that other elephants a kilometer away turned their heads to locate. Today the matriarch keeps the young calves in the shallows, the deeper water of the channel avoided. She is a large female, perhaps 40 years old, with asymmetric tusks and a tear in her right ear, and she has watered at this river every dry season of her adult life. She knows this stretch. She knows where to cross and where not to cross. She knows the section downstream where the crocodiles concentrate. This knowledge is not written anywhere. It exists only in her, and through her, it is transmitted to the calves that walk beside her, the next generation, absorbing the accumulated experience of the last. This is one of the things that makes elephant society so remarkable. It is a society organized around the retention and transmission of information. The matriarch is not simply the largest or most dominant female. She is the archive. She holds within her the knowledge of drought routes used decades ago, of water sources that exist only in exceptional dry years, of human activity in various parts of the range. When she is gone, that knowledge is gone, and the group navigates the world with a smaller map. The calves that are learning the river this morning will know it themselves in time, and they will teach their own calves, and this knowledge will persist in the community for as long as the community persists. It is a continuity that runs deeper than genetics. Downstream from the elephant family, where the bank is steep and a single large leadwood tree grows from a crack in the cut bank, a pair of hammerkop birds are adding a final layer to a nest that has been under construction for 3 months. The hammerkop's nest is one of the most elaborate structures built by any bird in Africa, a closed dome of sticks and mud and grass that can be half a meter across inside and weigh as much as 50 kilograms, with a single small entrance tunnel facing downward to exclude rain and predators. This particular nest, wedged into the fork of the leadwood's massive lower branches, has been added to in previous seasons, and is now so large it is visible from the opposite bank of the river. The birds work with a methodical intensity, each returning from the floodplain with sticks and grass stems gathered in their beaks, each addition tamped into place with the peculiar sideways hammering movement that gives the hammerkop its name. Inside the nest, 2 eggs are warm in the darkness of the chamber, attended continuously by whichever parent is not currently gathering materials. In 3 weeks, the eggs will hatch, and the collection of materials will shift from nest maintenance to feeding, the parent's days reorganized entirely around the constant requirement of 2 growing chicks. Along the bank between the leadwood tree and the place where the crocodile attempted its strike, there are oxpeckers on a waterbuck, moving through the animal's coat in that rapid, searching way they have, probing the skin around every cut and scratch and parasite. The waterbuck tolerates this, with the patience of an animal that understands, or at least has come to accept, the relationship. The oxpeckers take the ticks and the blood and the loose skin. The waterbuck gets a reduction in parasite load. It is one of the valley's many mutual arrangements, the kind of cooperative relationship that accumulates over evolutionary time until it becomes part of the fabric of the ecosystem itself, invisible to most of what is happening on the banks. In the river itself, the life is no less intense. The Luangwa holds one of the richest freshwater fish communities in southern Africa, over 400 species distributed through the channel and the floodplain pools and the deep holes where the current slows. Tigerfish patrol the middle depths, silver and aggressive, their interlocking teeth visible even when their mouths are closed. Bream congregate near the submerged vegetation at the margins. Barbel move along the bottom, their sensory barbels trailing across the silt, reading the chemical signals of whatever has passed this way recently. The river is not just the surface that the buffalo crossed. It is a vertical world of extraordinary complexity, layer upon layer of biological activity, from the algae on the submerged rocks to the birds working the air above the surface. Back in the tree line on the far bank, the buffalo has stopped moving. He is standing in the shade of a large sycamore fig, and the wound on his rear leg is caking with the first dried blood that will eventually form a protective crust. He is not well. The physiological cost of what he has been through in the last hour is substantial, and the wound, though not immediately life-threatening, will impose a cost on his movement over the coming days. He needs to eat. He has been grazing lightly for 2 days, but not sufficiently, and the energy expenditure of the crossing and the struggle has drawn heavily on reserves that were already below their usual level. He turns his head and looks at the grass at the edge of the tree line, the dry season remnants of a flush that was richer in the weeks just after the rains ended. He begins to graze. There is something almost philosophical about this image, the wounded animal returning to the most basic function of existence, the taking of energy from the world, carrying on with the absolute ordinariness of being alive. He does not assess his situation. He does not consider the morning's events or what they mean for his future. He eats, and the earth turns, and the sun moves across the valley's sky, and the river continues to carry itself downstream toward the distant sea. He will need to find water again. The far bank has its own access points to the river, less concentrated than the crossing he used this morning. Sections of bank where he can approach the water carefully and drink without committing to the deep channel. He has crossed to a section of the valley that he has used less frequently than his home range on the other side, but he is not entirely unfamiliar with it. Buffalo build mental maps of their range across years of use, and the features of this side of the river are not unknown to him. What he does not know is whether there are predators on this side already. There is a different coalition of lions that holds territory here, a group of 3 young males who pushed into this range when the previous male aged out, and they have been using the far bank with increasing confidence over the last 2 seasons. They are not as experienced as the group he has just escaped, not as practiced at the cooperative positioning that makes large prey hunted efficiently, but 3 large male lions moving together are a significant threat to any single animal, however large. The valley holds its dangers on both sides of the river. He eats for 20 minutes, moving slowly along the edge of the tree line, his leg dragging slightly on the left side. Then he stands in the shade and is still. The morning's heat is at its peak now, the air shimmering over the open plain to the north. The sound of the valley, reduced to the insistent calling of a single woodland kingfisher, somewhere in the trees above him, a bright, mechanical note, descending the scale in a downward spiral, before climbing and repeating. He will rest through the midday heat. This is what buffalo do. This is what everything in the valley does, if it can, in the worst of the afternoon heat. Rest, reduce metabolic cost, wait for the temperature to moderate. Then, in the late afternoon, when the air cools slightly and the animals that depend on sight begin to lose their visual advantage over the darkening plain, movement resumes. By evening, he will need to drink again. The day passes over the valley, with the slow authority of African time. The light shifts from the hard, white brilliance of noon through the long golden afternoon that photographers and cinematographers and anyone who has ever sat quietly in the bush and paid attention knows as something close to miraculous, a quality of illumination